Hi, I'm Angela Bassa, and welcome to my digital provocation. Data is not ground truth. Data are artifacts of systems. They tell us how a system's digital exhaust is working. So what we see is not necessarily representative of what was actually happening. Ground truth is the way the world actually runs, the way the world actually works. We have many examples of data representing what we want to gather, not representing actual truth. For instance, policing. There are many data sets that talk about policing. That data doesn't tell us about crime. It tells us about systems designed to catch criminals and how well they're working per the way that they were designed, per the way that their data capture and data collection were designed. But they don't tell us about all of the data points that could not have been collected given the way the systems are implemented. There are many adversarial uses of data. There's misinformation and disinformation, which we've become abundantly familiar with in the age of COVID and in the age of adversarial attacks on electoral systems. And so it's incumbent upon us to think about what is the intent that the data is being used with. Is it intended to inform? Is it intended to persuade? Is it intended to confuse? And I'm not even talking about Sharpiegate here. When airplanes were being first designed for professional pilots, fighter pilots, the Air Force collected all of this data on the dimensions of pilots, their leg length, their torso length, their weight, and created the perfect average seat for a pilot. And what happened? When those planes crashed, the falls were lethal. Very few pilots would survive. And why is that? Because there is no average pilot. After that learning, they modified the seats to have adjustments so that it could be moved forward for folks with shorter legs. It could be moved up for folks with shorter torsos, but it didn't assume that an average seat would fit every pilot. And instead, it had to reinterpret what the data that had been gathered meant. Was the data wrong? No, the data wasn't wrong. The way the data was utilized was imperfect. There are also medieval recreations of what animals might have looked like, made solely off of recollections of travelers who actually went there and brought back merely the information. There were no photographs. What would an elephant look like? A crocodile? An oyster? That's the same principle. There are artists whose job it is to interpret artifacts and try to recreate them for a contemporary audience. And those are called paleodesigners. They look at fossils, not data fossils, literal fossils, and they try to imagine what those animals would have looked like had they had cartilage, feathers, fat. But a lot of our interpretation of what dinosaurs look like may not actually look like what they did when they were roaming the earth. And that's the same principle that I'm talking about here. There's this wonderful book called All Yesterdays, which interprets what modern animals might look like put through the lens of paleo design. For instance, what might a cow look like? What would rhinos look like? What might swans look like if the artist didn't know a priori that feathers, cartilage, or fat had to be added on to the artifacts, which are literal bones? That's what we're talking about when we say that data is not ground truth. Data are bones left under debris, under sediment, under layers and layers of assumptions and intent and heuristics. Okay, so what to do? Bring a healthy dose of skepticism to how you interpret data. Data are not facts. Facts come from how data is used and interpreted.